Okay, welcome to our last lecture of the course. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've had an opportunity to read some writers that you didn't know much about. Maybe you found a couple of favorites. That would be really awesome. Rita Dove is on tap, as well as Sandra Cisneros, for this particular lecture on contemporary writers, and I like both of them. I hope you will too. I think especially Dove is a very interesting poet. That's her up in the upper right-hand corner. And we're going to take a look at a few of her poems here. I know it's quite a few. We'll only be able to kind of touch the surface of each one, but maybe we'll also find some patterns in them. Be very careful to watch all the way to the end of this lecture, the second video especially, because there are going to be some special instructions on how we wrap up. Okay, but let's talk about her first poem here, Banneker, which is about Benjamin Banneker. They made a stamp of him down there. He's a very famous fellow. Actually, I think he's not as famous as he should be, to be honest with you. I don't know how many of you knew about Benjamin Banneker when you took U.S. history, either in high school or college. I don't know whether they really give you much about him. He was an amazing fellow, very talented in lots of different regards, a very much an Enlightenment man. Very much like, for example, Jefferson or Franklin or someone like that, who had lots and lots of different interests and lots and different talents. He was a surveyor. He was a map maker. He was an inventor. He was an astronomer, a writer, all kinds of things. Of course, he lived there in Baltimore. And she opens the poem with a very interesting sort of take on him. I mean, you expect him, since he was African American, you might expect her to say, wow, this is one of my heroes, right? It shows, the great accomplishments of early Black Americans in even before the United States was started. But she kind of doesn't, make it all praise and glorification of him. She kind of takes him as who he is. And in fact, that's part of what the poem is I try to discover who was this guy. Who was this fellow? What would he have been like? What was, what made him tick? Were there good things? Were there not so great things about him? And she says, she's trying to imagine what it might have been like to know him. She opens with, what did he do except lie under a pear tree wrapped in a great cloak and meditate on the heavenly bodies, right? Fellow was kind of a do nothing in some ways, right? What'd he do? I mean, he was a big thinker and dreamer and all that kind of thing. Venerable, the good people of Baltimore whispered, shocked and more than a little afraid. After all, it was said he took to strong drink. He's a good drinker, right? Big drinker. So she doesn't start off with, oh, Benjamin Banneker, great hero of America, great sort of Black founding father of. No. She's kind of like, I can see how people might say, look at that dude. He's just sitting out there under a pear tree, just thinking all day. What does he do for a living anyway? Or maybe he didn't understand him. But then there are other people who say, no, he's really smart. He's really smart. But then again, he drinks a lot. So she's trying to get the full measure of the fellow. And this is, I think, something that I love about Rita Dove's poetry. She's fascinated by people from the past, and I am too. And she ponders and wonders what it must have been like to know him. What would he have been like? But who would want him? Neither Ethiopian nor English, neither lucky nor crazy, a capricious bird humming as he penned in his mind another inflamed letter to President Jefferson, right? Because he was an agitator about slavery and wrote to Thomas Jefferson when he was president saying, you have African Americans all wrong. Even though you owned slaves, you never really got to know them well. You don't know what their capabilities are. You sell their intellectual capacities short. And so, I mean, he was an agitator, right? Political agitator. So Freeman, and an entrepreneur of some repute. But she says, who would want him, right? I don't know any black lady or white lady who'd want to marry this guy. So this is hardly, hero worship here. And I think it's really interesting. She goes on and talks about what all kinds of accomplishments he had. And astronomy was one of his great interests. He used his telescope, which she compares to a rifle, to shoot out the stars, and lowering his eyes to fields sweet and the rot of spring, he could see a government's domed city rising from the morass and spreading in a spiral of lights, right? Benjamin Banneker was, to a very considerable extent, responsible for the design and layout of the nation's capital, right? That's what she's referring to here, the domed city. A city that is, right now, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but home to a very large percentage of African Americans. The city that these African American folks living in Washington, D.C. lived in was pretty well designed by Benjamin Banneker, or at least he was a very important part of it. And I'll bet you most people don't even know it. I bet you that they don't even know the guy's name. They don't know anything about him. So here's a great way for Rita Dove to kind of make this tacit argument that we ought to get to know people like this, people who've kind of been forgotten or written out of history, who deserve to be read about, but don't go making homage to them, treating them like they're, walk on water or anything like that. She's not interested in that. She wants to really know who the real person is as best she can. That even extends to this very disturbing second poem, Parsley, getting to know a capricious and cruel dictator. Most of us don't also know anything about the Dominican Republic in the 20th century. Most of us don't anyway. The Dominican Republic and Haiti are two countries that share the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean. And in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, it was largely a military dictatorship, the Dominican Republic, under Rafael Trujillo. As the story goes, Trujillo was just a terrible fellow, and rose from the ranks of being kind of a security guard in the sugarcane fields, which was the main crop in the Dominican Republic. May still be, I don't know. He sort of weaseled his way and frankly murdered his way into becoming the dictator of the country. You may be glad to know, I don't know, that he was assassinated. There's the car they shot him in. They ambushed him and assassinated him in, I believe, 1957, I think, something like that. You can look it up. So, that's what happens to bad guys. They end up getting killed by other bad guys. But along the way, in 1937, on an evening in October, he got drunk, and the talk turned to the fact that so many of the people from the eastern side of Hispaniola, where Haiti is, which is majority African American, were coming over to the western side is where Haiti is, coming over to the eastern side of Hispaniola, where the Dominican Republic is, crossing the border. And you can look at a map and see this. And these people were coming over here, and he was very concerned. He was very much a racist fellow, and was very concerned that they were going to bring their traditions, their language, their culture, their way of life, and sooner or later the Dominicans would be outnumbered or overwhelmed or overrun by these folks. Remember, this is 1937. He's picking up ideas that he gets from people like, that little fellow with another funny mustache. You notice his mustache there. With another funny mustache over in Germany about Lebensraum and inferior races and all this kind of stuff. So on an October night in 1937, allegedly when he was drunk, he simply said, we should take a bunch of these people out and shoot them. Go up and down the border with the Haiti and shoot these people and make sure that they don't come over here to our side of the island. Well, how will we know who they are? What will be the test to be able to determine who gets shot and who doesn't? And he came up with something very capricious, which is, well, I hear tell that people over in the Dominican Republic, especially black folks over there, I mean, in Haiti, I keep getting them mixed up, sorry. In Haiti, they can't pronounce the letter R in Spanish, right? And so we'll have our guards or soldiers pull out a sprig of parsley and ask them to say what it is. And if they mispronounce it and don't give it the right trill or the right pronunciation of the R in Spanish, well, we'll shoot them. And he allegedly shot 20,000 people that way and killed them. Just the capriciousness and the evil of this is just terrible. A couple of things, though, I want you to see in the poem, which I think are worth considering here. A complete disregard for humanity. He doesn't even think of these people as people. Decides in a drunken joke or jest, this is how he's going to kill a bunch of people because he thinks they need to stay on their side of the island, and I don't like these people, and I don't like the way they speak or the way they talk, the way they act or they're, and just decides this is how we're going to do it. It's just a totally random way of deciding how to kill people because he doesn't value human life. But now, two things to keep in mind. Why are the references to parrots and to sugarcane so frequent in the poem? I'm going to suggest that, of course, parrots mimic language, don't they? They say things. So I think she's using that, right? The pet parrot and all this kind of stuff. The parrot in the poem, parrots are one of those animals, one of those birds that can repeat your language to you. You can say hello, and that parrot will say hello. And so that has something to do with it, because remember, the key mechanism for determining whether to kill people is whether they say something properly. Okay, he seems to have more regard for his parrot than he does for people. But there's more to that parrot aspect too, because when you say parroting, that's also another term for repeating somebody, right? Oh, he parroted this and whatnot. The second thing, the sugar cane. Look at sugar cane over there on the right hand side. It grows tall and in huge quantities, and it looks very uniform in some ways, right? Big groves of sugar cane, people, sugar cane, right? He has no more regard for people than if they were, sugarcane. I don't know, but that's repeated in there. Plus the emphasis on his mother repeatedly, and how much he loved his mother and missed his mother. I don't know how biographically accurate that is, but it's a very important part of the poem. I'm going to let you guys in discussion perhaps kind of sift through some of these elements, but they're very important. You can tell very clearly that Dove is saying, I want you to pay attention to these things. I want you to pay attention to the sugar cane, the parrot, and the mother, right? And you figure out why those are important and what function they serve in the poem. Moving over to Adolescence 1 and 2. She wrote an Adolescence 3. It's not in here. But couple of things. Now, when the title is Adolescence, you know that it's about adolescence. Well, you assume so anyway. And if it's Adolescence 1 and 2, you assume that there's a relationship between the poems. Adolescence 1 isn't so difficult to kind of get through, but Adolescence 2 is a real enigma to a lot of people, and I'm going to ask you to kind of perhaps weigh in on it in our discussion online and give us your thoughts, because I'm going to tell you there's a lot of disagreement about it, and people have their own impressions, and each time I read the poem, I come away thinking, well, no, I think something different now than I used to about it. So it's a very open-ended poem, but Adolescence 1 is a little bit more perhaps direct, a little bit more straightforward. It begins with, in water-heavy nights behind grandmother's porch, we knelt in the tickling grasses and whispered. Right? Some people have claimed that she's going to the bathroom outside. Right? You're a little kid. You live in a rural area. You go out the backyard, and I guess if you're having to pee, that the grass can like tickle your rear end. I don't know. Maybe that's more appropriate for some people to tell you than others. But we knelt in the tickling grass and whispered. Linda's face hung before us, pale as a pecan, and it grew wise as she said, "A boy's lips are soft as baby's skin." Right? Now, I don't know whether they're peeing or not, but maybe they're in the backyard. We know that. And they're in the grass, and it's nighttime. And when you're an early adolescent, when you're I don't know, 12, 13, whatever, imagine for a moment someone of your group knows more about the opposite sex than you, okay? Maybe she has a boyfriend, or she's kissed a guy before, and in hushed circles and whispers away from your moms and dads, right? Because that's embarrassing. One of them says, "I've kissed a guy before. I'll tell you what it's like," right? And all the other kids kind of gather around the small circle, and that early adolescent exploration that this poem seems to touch on, a young girl who's being told what it's like to kiss a guy, right? What's it like, right? That excitement. There's a time in our lives where everything about the opposite sex is kind of new and exciting. And I think she's touching on that in this poem. The air closed over her words. A firefly whirred near my ear, and in the distance I could hear street lamps ping into miniature suns against a feathery sky. Right? When they turn on, they sometimes used to make a noise, ping. Right? When the light would kind of flicker on, the street lights, when it's first turning dark. The firefly, which is a natural form of light, the street lamp, which is a man-made form of light, the man-made form of light is coming on, right? Is turning on. early adolescence, when, when you were little, you're like, didn't really care much about guys or girls, but there's that point when you're like, well, I don't know, maybe I actually do like, this person or whatever. I wonder what it's like to fall in love. I wonder what it's like to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I wonder what it's like to kiss somebody. I've never been kissed before, etc. And so, that the light that's coming on, the light of the firefly versus the street lamp, somehow or another we know, or I think it's pretty clear, that early adolescence is what's being dealt with in Adolescence 1. Adolescence 2 is a real enigma for a lot of people. It is a very complicated and hard to understand poem, and your theory is as good as mine. Okay, I do believe that it is about a period or phase of adolescence that comes later than the poem Adolescence 1. Although it is night, I sit in the bathroom. Okay, this is why some people are like, okay, outdoors versus indoors. Okay, waiting. Sweat prickles behind my knees. The baby breasts are alert. Venetian blinds slice up the moon. The tiles quiver in pale strips. What is she doing in a bathroom? Why is she sweating, and why is, her breasts on alert, whatever you want to say to that. What is she waiting for? There's moonlight. Okay, so there's light again, right? So if we think light imagery was important in the first poem, maybe it's important in the second poem. Then they come, the three seal men with eyes as round as dinner plates and eyelashes like sharpened tines. They bring the scent of licorice. One sits in the wash bowl, one on the bathtub edge, one leans against the door. Can you feel it yet? They whisper. I don't know what to say. Again, they chuckle. Who are these seal men? I have no idea. Lots of theories out there. You decide. But there are three of them, and they sit in different places, and they talk to her. And they ask, can you feel it yet? I don't know what to say again. They chuckle. Patting their sleek bodies with their hands. Well, maybe next time. And they rise, glittering like pools of ink under moonlight, and vanish. I clutch at the ragged holes they leave behind here at the edge of darkness. Night rests like a ball of fur on my tongue. They're asking her they come and visit her. They're asking her a question. She doesn't know how to answer, and they say, well, okay, maybe next time. So there's a physical response. Does this have to do with menstruation? Does it have to do with, anxiety? Does it have to do with anticipation, scary things? Seal men with big giant eyes and sharp tines for eyelashes asking you questions and you don't have an answer to. It certainly evokes a feeling of being very disturbed or bothered, worried, scared, whatever it is. But it's been one of those poems that people say, I have very strong feelings that it's about this, and other people have very strong feelings it's about something else. You decide, because I want to hear what you think. Who are these seal men, and what's going on with this? Why are they asking her this question, and why is she unable to answer? And then why do they give up on her and then go away? Why three of them? Why seals, for heaven's sakes? Anyway, in the final poem here that we're looked at, and I'm sorry to give short shrift, but I want us to read several of them. I think it's important with a poet like Rita Dove that you don't just read one, that you read several, and then you can revisit, and maybe it'll encourage you to read some more of her poetry. I think she's one of the great living poets in the United States right now. I think she's truly a talented person. This one's about Rosa Parks. And again, Parks is not made into this sort of, perfect heroine that is without question, although she's clearly admired by Dove. Take a look at this. How she sat there, the time right inside a place, so wrong it was ready. Let's try that again. My eyes aren't doing well. How she sat there, the time right inside a place, so wrong it was ready. That's a very convoluted pair of lines. Let's untangle it for a moment. How she sat there, the time right inside a place, so wrong that it was ready, is a way you could read it. What place? Well, the place, Birmingham. You remember that Rosa Parks was the one who in 1955 said, I am not sitting at the back of the bus. I'm going to sit where I want to in the bus. And she was ultimately taken from the bus and arrested for violating the city code on that, right? Which in turn prompted it's Montgomery, not Birmingham. Montgomery bus boycott. African Americans boycotted city buses for a period of time until there was some reform in that regard. She, of course, has been made into a great figure of the civil rights movement. She died a few years ago, but she was actually not a terribly old woman at the time. She was about 40, but she's been made out to be this kind of grandmotherly figure her whole life and dressed that way. But the time right inside a place so wrong it was ready. The place was so wrong that it was ready. Wrong in terms of its injustices, that it was ready to be what? Changed, right? The time was right inside a place so wrong that it was ready, one assumes, to be changed, and that would be the segregationist South. The remainder of the poem, the trim, that trim name with its dream of a bench to rest on, her sensible coat. What does she mean by a trim name? It's a fairly short name, Rosa Parks. It's a fairly simple name. It's not like, Juanita Cunningham. It's not a long name like that. That trim name, Rosa Parks, with its dream of a bench to rest on. I just want to sit out on the bus, okay? I just want to sit on the bus. There's no room in the back or whatever the circumstance is. This one's open. There's plenty of room up front. I'm sitting down, okay? I just want to go to work. Her sensible coat. She's always been had pictures of her taken with her coat on. By the way, that is a picture of her mugshot down there, and it is a picture of her to the right there, sitting on the actual bus illegally. Someone came and took a photo of her on the bus that she was not going to move. And so that's her in flagrante, which means breaking the law right there, breaking the rule. And there she is with her mugshot. Doing nothing was the doing. Doing nothing was the doing. I'm not moving. I'm just going to resist by just doing nothing. I'm sitting here. You got to make me move. The clean flame of her gaze carved by a camera flash, right? So the photo that you see there is actually the photo that's being referred to in the poem, or at least part of it. There's the rest of the photo. There's a guy behind the mugshot, right? So these are two photos superimposed on one on top of the other. How she stood up when they bent down to retrieve her purse. That courtesy. Right? So as they're taking her away, They bent down to retrieve her purse, which I suppose was maybe somewhere else, maybe on the floor or whatever. And she stood up to give them room to do that. So even when she was arrested, she wasn't disorderly. She wasn't undignified. She was courteous, right? Let me give you room. Thank you for helping me. Let me give you room so that you can do this thing. It was a fairly civil arrest, to be honest with you. It was a fairly polite arrest. But she was firm in saying, I'm not moving. And I think that's one of the things that Dove is trying to do here, is to say there's a certain dignity to her simplicity. She was not trying to make a show. She was not trying to be one of these people yelling with a bullhorn and screaming at the top of it. Nope. Just listen. I'm tired. I'm going to sit down. There's no room in the back. I'm sitting. Okay. And well, that's illegal. Well, I don't care if it's illegal. I have as much right. I paid the same fare to ride this bus as anybody else, and I'm going to sit in a seat I want to sit into. Well, we'll arrest you. Well, then that's what you'll have to do. But I'll be as polite and cooperative as I can. And that's what she did. Book me, and I will go to jail. And she did. Can you imagine throwing her in jail for that? But certainly that's the dignity is what she's trying to capture here. She's not trying to say, oh, she was some heroic person who saved the country. She's just saying, no, she's just a lady who did one thing, and that one thing was enough, and she didn't try to draw a lot of attention to herself about it. The next video, which will be our second one here, and will be about Sandra Cisneros. So be sure to watch that one, and then we'll talk about the end of the class.